So you're welcome to today's section, and we're going to look at a very important topic. When it comes to building large language models, there are 7 important parameters that are critical to configuring the architecture of a large language model. So knowing this at your fingertips helps you to control AI and large language models like a pro, like a real professional. So without much ado, let's dive into it. So first, the parameter number 1 is the maximum token, which we normally call the mass tokens. Now this parameter is very important and critical because it defines the upper limit of the number of tokens, which are the words or pieces of word the model can generate. So for example, if a token or a large language model has the configuration of mass token set to 50, the response wouldn't exceed that 50 tokens. So these are the first parameters that you need to know, and it's very, very important in building large language models. Parameter number 2 is the temperature. The temperature actually controls the randomness in the output. Higher values close to 2 implies that the response will be more creative, diverse, but sometimes less coherent. But lower values of the temperature closer to 0 will be more deterministic and more focused. So depending on the purpose for which the large language model or AI is built, the temperature should be determined. If the large language model will be required to actually be required to create creative stories and diverse stories, so the temperature need to be a little bit closer to 2 or higher. But when the LLM is being built for a more deterministic response, the temperature should be lower than that, should be lower than 2. Parameter number 3 the next parameter is the top P, which indicates the nucleus sampling. Parameter number 3 is nucleus sampling, top P. Now, this parameter actually keeps the smallest set of words whose cumulative frequency adds up to P, which is the probability mass. Now, example, if the top P is configured to be 0.9 in the LLM, what it implies that only a small sample from tokens that cover 90% of probability mass would be used. Parameter number 4. Parameter number 4 is the top K. It's another important parameter to keep in mind when building large language models like a pro. Now the top K actually limits the model to choose from the top K most probable tokens. Example, if the top K parameter is set to 50, it implies that only 50 most likely next words are considered. So this is another very important parameter or configuration while building large language models like a pro. Then parameter number 5 is the frequency penalty. The frequency penalty, just like the name suggests, penalizes tokens based on how often they appear. Higher penalty implies less repetition. Higher penalty implies less repetition. Parameter number 6 is a presence penalty. It encourages the model to introduce new tokens that haven't appeared before. It's actually useful for keeping the output to be varied. And lastly, parameter number 7, not the least but also important, is the stop parameter. Now this parameter lets you define the stop sequences that the LLM uses. Lets you define stop sequences, words and phrases. When the model generates them, it will stop immediately. So when the model is generating and it gets to these stop sequences that is set or configured as part of the parameters, the model stops generating. So these 7 parameters are very critical in building large language models, and you must know them. We code these large language models. Now first, let me show you the first token, which is a mass token. Now in this simple code here, you can see that the mass token has been set to 20, which limits the response length to 20. It won't exceed that. Now if this were to use to write a short story about the ocean, it won't limit the maximum token set as 20. The next token there is the temperature. Now from the first discussion, we did say that the temperature rather determines whether the model response will be deterministic or more creative. So this temperature has been set to 1.8, and it has been given a rule to create a story about a cat. So the temperature here, since it is 1.8, we create a story that is more random and creative. Now token number 3 is the top P. P here, like we said earlier, stands for the probability mass. So the probability mass restricts the token sampling to a particular value that it has been set to. Now for instance, the top P here, which is the probability mass, is set to 0.3, which restricts the token sampling to 30% probability mass. Next is the top K token. The top K token only considers the token most likely next to, the top K tokens only considers top 5 most likely next tokens. So the role of this configuration is to actually consider the top 5 most likely token. So if you change this configuration to 10, it means that the model will be looking at 10 most likely next token. So this is another important configuration when building an LLM. Now we go over to the next one, which is a frequency penalty. The frequency penalty reduces the repetition of words. So if in the model it is set to 1.5, it will reduce the number of times a particular word is repeated. Next is the presence penalty. The presence penalty also encourages introducing new topics in generation of the model or in its output. So note, the model is pushed to bring in new activities instead of repeating old ones. So this presence penalty is also a very important parameter when considering the model generation with respect to if it should bring in new activities or not. That's also a very important parameter in building the LLM. Next is the stop. The stop penalty here have been chosen as dragon. So what it means is that as the LLM tries to generate its outputs, generation stops when the word dragon appears. So these are some of the simple parameters that are critical in designing and building an LLM. Now, before we wrap up, just a quick overview of all these tokens in one script. Now if you look at this, still on that 7 important parameters, we have combined all the parameters here. You can see mass token set to 80, temperature 1, which controls the randomness and creativity of the output, nucleus sampling, restrict probability mass, and it is set here to 0.9. Top K here is set to 50. The frequency penalty here is set to 0.8. The presence penalty to 0.6. And then lastly, the stop generation when these words appear is set to the word the end. So these are very 7 important parameters that you need to know in order to use them like a pro when designing a large language model. If you have gained value from this video, please consider subscribing. See you on the next.